Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. We're going to be going over some of the findings and takeaways from our 2025 Disinformation and Malicious Email Report, and really covering why DMARC remains pivotal across all the industries that we looked at. Al, I'll kick it over to you for the agenda.
All right, so we'll touch on speaker intros and housekeeping and all that typical, usual stuff that we do to kick off any sort of webinar. I will do a quick touch base on the updated, very recently released Microsoft bulk sender requirements, announced in April, went into force in May. People have a lot of questions about those, so I'll make sure we cover them quickly. And then we'll start talking about the landscape around email authentication and domain protection, what's going on there, specifically what are sort of the broader challenges around phishing, spoofing, AI impersonation, and domain protection. And then we'll deep dive into DMARC adoption data, first at a big picture level across all of the sort of the email universe that we can see what our view there is, and then a deep dive into a dozen different industry snapshots, data there, who is being covered in these different industry segments, who's not being covered, the challenges specific to those segments. I'm not going to blindly read you 12 slides worth of data, but so we'll focus on some of the more interesting industries there, and we want to hear from you along that way too there. So please shoot us your thoughts, your feedback in the chat, ask us questions in the Q&A. Tell us what questions you have. Tell us what data you want us to focus on. We are happy to keep it interactive and reactive to your interests there. And then after we talk through the data in the industries, we will wrap it up with a little bit of closing thoughts and insight. Plenty of time for your questions as well, both along the way and at the end. Housekeeping notes, the typical stuff, right? Yes, this is being recorded. Yes, we'll send you a follow-up link. We'll also send you a link to the report that we're referencing throughout the webinar. And like I said, we really do want to hear from you. So feel free to drop us a line, whether it be just to tell us where you're from, where you're calling in from, what's going on with you today. If you're curious about certain industries, like if you care more about higher ed versus manufacturing, that's the kind of stuff we'd love to hear from you. And we will do our best to answer questions as much as we can. Warren, should we tell the world who Valimail is?
Sure. So yeah, Valimail is the leader in DMARC authentication, and we focus on automated DMARC, but we also provide customers with BIMI solutions and helping them achieve compliance with all of these new mailbox requirements. My name is Warren Duff. I'm the Director of Content Marketing at Valimail. I sort of lead the charge on thought leadership from Valimail's side of things, and happy to be of service today and on the webinar with Al. I think we worked really closely on developing this report and everything that goes along with it. Chris?
My name's Chris Cravens. I'm a longtime engineering leader in Silicon Valley. These days, I focus on more on the consulting side of things, a little less operational. I work a lot in venture and private equity, advising companies ranging from pre-seed, very very early concepts, all the way up to $80 billion market cap technology organizations. I tend to focus a lot on digital. So there's always a security element to that. My kind of passion area is driving outsized revenue performance through appropriate use of technology. Appropriate's a loaded word there, but through a kind of good use of technology. So I'm really happy to be here and happy to talk to everybody today.
Thanks, Chris. And as Warren said, I'm Al Iverson, though I am in our content marketing group, where I've been here at Valimail for the past year and having a lot of fun talking about DMARC. But my background is really email deliverability. So I was director of Salesforce, director of deliverability for Salesforce Marketing Cloud for a good 15 years. So that's really what my DNA is there, is helping email senders comply with complex sender requirements and maximize their inbox reach. All right, so we're going to kick it off with the first survey here, and be gentle with me. This is my first time doing a poll in here. So we're going to go, where are you on your DMARC journey? I'm going to pop this up on the screen. Blump. Love to hear if you're aware of DMARC and you've got it implemented. Feel free to pick where you're at. Tell us where you're at. If you're not sure, that is a perfectly fine answer too, because I know it can get complex and it's certainly not something that everybody's mastered. And hey, if you knew everything about DMARC already, you probably wouldn't be listening in on the webinar today. All right, folks are answering. Thank you so much. We'll give another second there. I think we've got good deal. I think I will end that. Let's share the results here. You can see what's going on. So a lot of people, as I suspected, we're going to touch more on this, are at P equals none. And, you know, it's where people sort of blindly start with what mailbox providers like Google and Yahoo and now Microsoft require of senders to do. But it's great to see that there's actually equal there with a bunch of people at reject as well. So people have actually taken that next step in a lot of cases to actually protect their domains against phishing and spoofing.
Yeah, that combination of people at quarantine and reject feels about right. Based on, I mean, just to preview the data, it feels like we're probably in the right spot here with the folks.
Yeah. All right, get this going. It's so funny. My friend Sylvia is in the chat as me because I forwarded her the link because she's had trouble signing up for our webinars before. So I'm getting chats from myself in there. It's very disturbing. So we're going to kick it off here with just a quick couple of minute overview of what's going on with updated sender requirements for Microsoft. Now, if you pay attention to this sort of thing, you might remember back to October 2023, when Yahoo and Google announced updated sender requirements that mandate email authentication and DMARC. Bulk senders are required to have SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, and a bunch of other stuff in place. Microsoft has now joined that party. As of early April, they announced that they also are requiring bulk senders being those who send at least 5,000 messages a day. And you can sort of think of that as a trigger. You might trip and then you're on the bulk sender list. It doesn't mean that you only have to comply on Tuesdays when you send more than 5,000, but it starts you, it sort of upgrades your domain to one that has to comply with the requirements. And those include, like I said, email authentication with SPF and DKIM, implementing DMARC. Microsoft says that a policy of P equals none is okay. I would put an asterisk to that and say it's not enough, but we'll talk more about that as we go through the data and what's going on there. Alignment is a very important part of DMARC too, and Microsoft specifically calls out alignment. Alignment means when the domain in your email authentication header matches the domain in your from address. That's alignment in a nutshell. There's, you know, it can get complex. There's exact alignment, or there's relaxed alignment, and strict alignment versus relaxed alignment. Won't get necessarily into the detail of that, but what they're saying here is to make sure that you are authenticating mail as you. That's what they're looking for when they're talking about alignment. They also talk about a few other things like having a compliant sender address, making sure that basically that you are compliant with the relevant specifications, the RFCs for internet email, like making sure that you have an A or MX record, preferably both, got the email authentication in place, make sure you're sending from an address that can accept mail back. Some of this is a little hand wavy about how they are going to specifically monitor for this, but they are putting it out there, putting it out to the world to say, hey, this is what we want to see senders do when they're sending email to us. And last point there, it should go without saying that it's all about being transparent with email practices, making sure you're sending mail to people who have asked for that mail and not third-party lists, not bot lists. Make sure you're processing bounces and properly handling rejections and so forth. And finally here, more importantly, this is policy convergence. And it's great to see. This is sort of my little matrix of a big chunk of the email universe, specifically mostly focused on consumer, right? This is where Google and Microsoft have said so far that their focus is applying these requirements to people sending mail to consumer mailboxes for now. That's very likely to grow and expand into business mailboxes as well. And the mailbox providers have said, look, business mailboxes, corporate enterprise mailboxes can be a lot more complex. There can be multiple entities involved, right? You can have an SEG in front of the mailbox provider, a lot of other forwarding or other mechanisms going on, both contractually, legally, think of message archiving and other stuff that can make what you might do with messages more complex in the business world. So that's why they started with this as a focus on consumer mailboxes, but keep in mind that it's very likely that this is going to expand to encompass B2B as well as B2C. So anyway, point being, convergence, right? This is the biggest mailbox providers. In deliverability world, we sometimes refer to this as Maggie, Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Yahoo. And what it shows us is that while there's some differences in the wording, at the end of the day, the requirements are very similar. Send wanted mail as measured by keeping low complaint rates, process bounces, email authentication, in some of these cases, alignment, right? And so, like I said, list unsubscribe, making it easy to unsubscribe, different tools and mechanisms for monitoring that. But like I said, it's all about sort of a convergence where if you were already working towards best common practices for email marketing, a lot of these were really just a translation of perhaps well-known by the savvy senders, but poorly documented best practices now being translated to actual documented requirements. These are the laws. We wrote them up and posted them, and this is what they expect senders to do. So if you are already on the path to broad compliance for these best practices, as for example, put forth by Yahoo and Google way back in late 2023, even before that, right? If you knew what was necessary to stand out from your sending practices to do things properly, you're probably already in working towards this direction, very close to these. So just to highlight here, right? If Microsoft did something really interesting with their handling of it, they said, "Hey, today's April 2nd. You need to start complying, and by the way, on May 5th, we're going to start blocking your mail if you don't comply." And that's pretty quick timeline there. If you look at some of the other providers, they moved much more slowly. Certainly, they might have kicked off the publishing of the requirements sooner, but they took a much longer path to compliance and a much more specific and individual set of mechanisms for that compliance, and it took them time to get to a place where they were comfortable applying compliance measures like blocking, rejecting mail that didn't comply. But if you look at what Microsoft did, they said, "Hey, get it together now. We're going to start blocking." And I really like that they did this. I think if you look at the requirements, you knew this was coming. We've all been talking about ever since ever since Google and Yahoo said that they're going to require this. You kind of knew, reading between the lines, that Microsoft, Apple, and others are all likely to sort of come to this convergence point for these requirements. And so here we are. Microsoft said, "Hey, you've already heard about these as best practices. Now you need to make sure you're going to do them. And by the way, if you're not doing them, you're going to start to see rejections." And if you look at my Ask Al Valimail videos, I publish those every Friday on LinkedIn and YouTube. I talk about the new Microsoft requirements a lot. And in fact, I'll have another video tomorrow specifically answering 4 questions that a lot of people have had where they're starting to see these rejections now. What do they mean? What can go wrong? And what do they do about it? So keep an eye out for more talk about that. Boy, I said I was going to do that quickly. I took up a lot of time there. Sorry, guys.
I think it's worth noting though, like and you mentioned it, right? There's the speed with which Microsoft is acting at this point, and I think that's such a good signal that we should all pay attention to, right? It feels like we're getting to that kind of next level of taking DMARC seriously.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think like it's important to know that, bulk senders, you're not going to be segmenting out just Microsoft mailboxes. You're going to be sending to an entire list of people. And so if Microsoft is requiring DMARC at a minimum of P equals none, that means you need to be applying it across the board and implementing this. So it's a broader thing that is making DMARC absolutely critical for anybody sending any amount of email.
Yeah, agreed.
And that's a good segue here to thinking about where DMARC applies to the enterprise and why it's so important. Just thinking of you thinking of the history of what constitutes enterprise or what constitutes business online, right? If you think about tech used to be confined to a very specific small set of very almost nerd focused companies, right? In the Silicon Valley, and now it's everywhere and everything, whether it be a SMB up to enterprise, right? Well, you could be the smallest restaurant selling sandwiches, and you are embedded in multiple tech stacks, right? You are, whether you're manufacturers, banks, hospitals, any of these companies are so intertwined into technology. It's just crazy to think that without protecting it against the bad things that can happen, phishing and spoofing, leading to takeovers, leading to loss of control, leading to lost revenue, anybody at almost any size is sort of at risk here if they are not protecting the technology that they are connected into. What do you guys think here? I think about too about AI as the other scope of increasing the scope of concern here. When I think about how in the past bad guys would have focused on what's the easiest point to get into somebody's mailbox and try to trick them. Common point of phishing, they might have taken over a specific account, targeted a few people in the C-suite for spear phishing, for example. But now with the growth of AI and automation, it's so much easier for the bad guys to just set up a million permutations and just sort of poke at every possible potential hole, whether there's a chance of success or not, and see what can actually get through and do something bad with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things with that. So first, to the first point, every company's a tech company now. I agree with that 100%, right? We're seeing this with the adoption of AI tools at an alarming rate, even in traditional enterprises, and companies working extremely hard to try and digitize their businesses and really look at how to automate, how to gain more efficiency, bring more automation, which just puts more reliance on systems, and it changes your surface area for your company, right? So you're not just worried about your brick and mortar locations. Every email that goes out, every website, every microsite, every potential interaction with a customer in digital space becomes another thing that you have to care about. And that communication, to your point, and the risks with AI, there's a couple things within there. If you think about AI's ability to hyper personalize, right, to within context of an individual, determine what does this person care about and how do I influence them in a certain direction. I don't know if you saw this, but there was an article that just came out this week. I think it was a university in Sweden ran an experiment with 15 AI bots that they put into Reddit to see how they could influence people. And they found that they were able to very effectively influence kind of a day-to-day user with comments from their bots by going through and first kind of doing a quick pre-scan of that user, reading through all of their content, making a determination on what are they going to care about and what's the lever, and then personalizing a comment or a message with them to sway their opinion. Now think about this in terms of like a malicious actor and a spam sender or a spearfish sender, right? So whatever surface area you have about a particular executive in your team, that they can go and mine. They can find their personal web footprint, their professional footprint. They can determine very quickly, what does Al care about? What does Warren care about? And let me send a very targeted message to that person to try and get them to click on the link, click the shiny button, give me your password. And now you're into that person's system. And then from there, all of that same kind of improvement that we talked about that people are trying to prosecute from a digital perspective on how they automate their business, now that's all potentially available to that bad actor to act on that person, act like through whatever workflows and send whatever payments and do all the things. So the risks all of a sudden get much higher as your surface area is still the same, the tools available to the bad actors are improving exponentially, and the risk is increasing exponentially on the other side of it.
And we chuckle sometimes at how inexact AI can be in some of its responses, but think of it at scale, right? If you only have to have a certain percentage of success, it doesn't matter if you get every message perfect or not. The bad guy can spin up AI to send a million different messages and have a million different chances, a million different opportunities there. They don't need 100% success. They just need a greater than 0% chance of success to be able to get in there and do something nefarious.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We'll make it up on margin. It'll be fine.
So that's a good segue to thinking about how to monitor, manage, and protect this, right? You can't manage what you can't see. And if you think of the threats growing at scale and your email ecosystem growing at scale, think of all the different providers you're embedded into, all the different places you might have had to set up email authentication, right? Ticketing system, order system, email marketing system, CRM system, all those different places that are potential opportunities to send mail from as you, opportunities for people to get into. And so how do you monitor and get feedback to keep track of all of that and be aware of that? We're going to touch on this too. I've got an interesting example when we get to the US government slide of where this kind of thing can go wrong. Just thinking about how email, everybody says email is dead, email's going away. Email is not going anywhere. It's still king. It's the backbone of communication on multiple levels, from SMB up to enterprise, anywhere from the one-to-one communication of closing enterprise deals to order receipts and automated password resets for self-service systems. It's just everywhere. And that's a bunch of potential opportunities for phishing, for spoofing, for gateways that bad links that lead into access to data that people shouldn't have access to. And so it becomes a question of what protection do you actually have in place? What monitoring do you have in place to protect what data you have in place? What do you guys think?
Oh, absolutely. I'm just kind of laughing cynically because there are so many times through my career, I've been at this about 25, 30 years now, and so many times I've heard email is going away. And I used to joke about this all the time when I was a operational CIO. Anytime I'd come into a place and there'd be some like really terrible system and they'd say, "Oh, it's going away." It's like, yeah, I know that one's here from the duration of my career. We're never getting rid of it. We're never getting rid of email. Every one of these systems that comes in says we're replacing email. Every transaction that you have, it sends an email on the back end to confirm it, right? You get a message in Slack, you get an email that tells you got a message in Slack, right? And not to mention like the point around, you're out of band access. It's all via email. And you look at just kind of the proliferation of all of the tools, right? So we've moved to cloud. We've solved our centralized IT problem by decentralizing and creating a decentralization process. Most IT organizations manage hundreds of applications, if not into the thousands. So, and those are now in the cloud. So you've got hundreds of different places where email is potentially coming from. And you need to be able to secure all of those and understand like how you monitor all of that. So without some kind of visibility, you can't tell what's happening. I remember at one point on this, like, what data do you have? This is a fascinating one. When I started into my email authentication journey when I was at Uber, I was very early at Uber, scaled them from 24 cities to 300 cities. I was the CIO there, first CIO, built the IT organization, built a whole bunch of the company. But at one point, when I first started talking with Valimail, we had, I think, 97% of the email that was flying around on the internet as Uber.com was not from us.
Crazy.
So, just
That's
think
just
about that.
crazy.
That is absolute insanity. And just think about that from like a security perspective. If you were to bring that a parallel over into the physical security world, and let's say, you have an event and you let 100 people in, only 3 people are supposed to be there. How are you managing that?
Yep.
It
Wow.
just doesn't make sense.
So let's talk about protection there and specifically start to tease a little bit of the data here. Here is sort of our view of the email universe. It's great to see that now in 2025, we are very near 8 million domains that have published a DMARC record. Enforcement lags, meaning you can publish DMARC, but you can do it in a way where it just says report only, don't actually bounce anything out. Let the 97% of bad guys through, to Chris's point there, that the black sliver along the bottom there, that's the count of domains actually in enforcement. So it's great to see, especially here, right? This is where Yahoo and Google and Yahoo announced their requirements here. Took a couple of months, and then hockey stick takes off. I bet we're going to look back later this year and see a similar sort of hockey stick up there at the right end, thanks to Microsoft. And so it's driving adoption, but it doesn't mean that people are actually protecting their domains against phishing and spoofing. Here's that same data done another way, right? Like of the universe of our different industries. Looking at these, some of these are really good, right? Like online retail, 95% DMARC adoption rate. Manufacturing, 91, 92% DMARC adoption rate. But what about protection rate? All right, these look at retail, 95% of online retailers that we surveyed. And again, these are the big end. These are the bigger ones that theoretically are the smartest, that care the most. So it's great that they've thought to do DMARC. They've read that it's a requirement. But when you look at what percentage of them are actually protected, drops down here closer to 2/3, just under 2/3 of the online retailers are protected. That gap here is what I'm talking about. This is people that have implemented DMARC across these industries, but haven't proactively gotten to that final step of protecting their domain. And retail is one of the better ones, right? Look at higher ed, look at arts and recreation, all of these different ones where you've got this line here where it there's a whole bunch of people that have heard of DMARC. Somebody told them they did to do DMARC. They read that they have to do it. They did it, great, but their domains are not actually set up to protect them against phishing and spoofing.
So Chris, from your perspective, why do you think there's this lag between enforcement and implementation?
I think there's a couple of things with that. I think in some ways the industry's still kind of struggling to really get it, to really like grok what DMARC does, why you need it, why it's important. As we've seen, like just with the broad kind of uptick taking some time. But even from there, like for those folks, like maybe they're focusing on, they think the problem is spam filtering, and they want to focus on AI spam filtering, and you kind of get caught up in the hype cycles of what the latest ESG can do, right? Could be that, could be competition for resources of where budget goes, right? But I think there's, once you get past that kind of thing of do I need this, if you can convince the team, like the team realizes that they actually need it, there's a whole nother step around change management. So back to my point earlier around how many systems really run in a modern IT organization, especially if there's a presence around like, we'll call it shadow IT for the source of, or for the sense of discussion here, but shadow IT is really just this kind of unmet technical need out within the business, right? And depending on the philosophy of the organization, it can be managed or unmanaged or chaotic. But the point is, there's just more stuff happening than most IT organizations can handle. So it's always a prioritization conversation. And when you have a lot of different services that are sending, you can have a whole bunch of people, and there's a change management process and an identification process that you need to run to go out and just figure, okay, well, who stood up what? And once you start, you turn on, your DMARC record and you start to see where all the email is coming from, you now need to tie out who actually stood that thing up and how do I go talk to them and tell them we have to make some changes so that we can send securely. I know when I did this at Uber, it took us about 4 months to get through that process. And we were a very federated organization, and my philosophy with IT was always like, let's empower people to do the right things and do them safely. So we had a fair amount of like citizen developers out within the world that were getting things done. But I hear this from other CXOs that is really the hard part of this. It's the communication and the change management and figuring out who actually is behind all of these different services so that you can manage the process of getting them authenticated and get through that. Now, Valimail was super helpful to us in that, and we automated a fair amount of it. But there's still this thing of you have to go talk to your business leaders and find out what they're doing, and tell them what it is that you want to accomplish and why it makes sense for them, and get them on board. Right? I think that's still like the biggest challenge.
Thinking about shadow IT too, right? And if you think about, there's two kinds of shadow IT, and people don't necessarily realize they both exist, right? There's the nerd level stuff, right? I was used to be in marketing ops. I've certainly worked a place or two where we commandeer an old desktop and install Ubuntu or OpenBSD or something on it, and literally set up a server to track data for us and send out email based on that data. So especially in a tech heavy company, you'll have entities, like you say, you empower the smarter folks to do things that they're good at and build widgets and tools, and sometimes those are within known processes and sometimes not. But a lot of companies in the tech space are going to have that, oh, we've got this server under the desk that some guy built that's doing this random stuff that we didn't really know about. Is it sending emails? Who has access to it? Or we know it's secured properly? But then nowadays, as tech tries to appeal itself to those who are not going to install Linux on a leftover server, who just are maybe not going to write code themselves, but they know that they can go sign up for a service and click on the tool that says use entry to implement your DNS, and away we go, and we'll take care of it all for you. And so you have this second type of shadow IT, which is going to be somebody in your organization. It might not be a developer. It could be somebody in HR. It could be somebody in marketing, and they go sign up for a software as a service platform, whether it be an Aweber or a MailChimp to send a newsletter, or an HR service to be able to handle applicants. And those are all these other extra areas that are now able to, or want to be able to, send email from your domain. Are going to have some level of your data, and how well is all that stuff protected?
Yeah, pick a niche collaboration tool. I'm on a team. I want to interact with a design partner. They use Notion, so I go stand up a Notion instance. Now I want to be able to send email as Notion. Okay, great. That's another thing that we have to include, right? So it becomes this thing, right? It's all the right intentions, right? That the intentions all around, like, how do I build this business? How do I satisfy my customers? How do I do the right things to go and grow revenue or reduce margins or solve business problems, right? And the thing that we have to solve on the engineering side of it, and on the security side of it, is how do we enable that in a way that does not increase our risk profile as a company, in a way that is responsible to our shareholders and to our investors, and in a way that is ultimately going to provide the right kind of benefits for everybody involved, so that the company can continue to be here providing great services.
Yep, exactly. So I should have flipped these two slides around. We're going to talk a little bit about the industry data here, but before we do, a note on the methodology. As I mentioned before, the goal here was to focus on the biggest companies in these different industry segments, measured a few different ways. I grant very obviously that it's not always apples to apples. Some of this data is easier to get at than others. Sometimes we rank companies or organizations based on their market capitalization. It could be based on their stock price if they're a public company. Some of them might be less clear, or they're not specifically a money-making enterprise when you get into some of the higher ed or the government entities. So it might be based on ranking of traffic from the different places that rank traffic, that sort of thing. But our goal there was to have the big end of the companies, as Warren and I have talked about a lot, right? And you don't need to go 10 million deep in all these different industries. So you go, some of them you could be as little as 300 to 500 top entities, and you're covering 99% of what's actually out there and used by customers.
I thought that was so interesting, because my initial reaction was like, all right, well, we should be looking at 20 million domains in retail. Well, is that helpful? Is that useful? Really, what you want to be looking at is who is taking up and sending 90% of that email, because those are the big fish in the pond. Those are the people whose DMARC position really matters. Like, if you're a tiny, garage sized company sending a couple hundred emails from a very tiny domain, should you be in this research swaying things and you know, contributing to not necessarily correct data? I don't think so. It's more about like centering on the biggest senders, the people that are sending the most email.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. We don't want all the long tail noise, right? I think
Exactly.
what's really important is what are the, where is the puck going to like put the Gretzky kind of spin on it?
Yeah.
And when we talk about DMARC policy in this data, here's what we're talking about. DMARC has 3 possible policies. That's none, quarantine, and reject. None being report, meaning report only. Quarantine being treat it more suspectly, apply more filtering to it, or examine it more closely. Or reject be discard it, sorry, not discard it, reject it, disallow delivery of it outright if it fails authentication checks. So when we talk about DMARC policy breakdowns, those are what we're referring to. And also, finally, when we talk about DMARC at enforcement, that means a DMARC policy for the domain at quarantine or reject. The domain is fully covered, no none in there, no none at a subdomain level, any of that stuff. So that's what's most important there too, by the way. We see a lot of DMARC out in the wild where they'll protect the top level of domain, but they'll do this setting, this SP setting for subdomains, and they'll set it to none. So that means that your top level domain is protected. That's great for your corporate enterprise mail coming out of Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. But what about the subdomains that you might have set up in, Salesforce or Oracle or any of these other platforms? They're not protected similarly, so it gets a little scary there. It's something to be aware of.
Alan, we've got
Yeah,
a question. How can people find out? The question is their DMARC score, but I assume it's how can people figure out what their DMARC policy is, or if they even have one?
We can help with that. We have a cool tool called the Valimail Domain Checker. Go to valimail.com. You look in the navigation there right at the top. Domain Checker, you can type in your domain name, and we'll tell you what we can see. The cool thing about DMARC is that it's public. It's part of DNS, and so it's very easy to publicly look up the DMARC record and DMARC settings and policy for a given domain name. So if you want to nerd out like I do about it, even going back to before I came to Valimail, right? You can get these lists of top X domains, and you could put together your automation to try to track that. It was kind of fun for me to do that on a sort of an ad hoc little homegrown basis of it. And then I came here to Valimail and found out that we have this cool thing that does this at a much bigger level. So it's kind of neat. You can sort of track that universe because all of that data is open to display. So on the individual level, that's what you do is you look up the DNS record for DMARC, and that's what our tool helps you do is it'll look up the DMARC record and it'll help you parse and understand the results there. So I said I had an interesting story to tell about government here. A couple things. When I talk about government, I am really talking about all of these different entities that are part of government, and maybe in ways you didn't think about. Because if you have ever talked to us at Valimail about U.S. government data before, you've heard us say, well, at the federal level, DMARC is pretty well implemented, which is very much a good thing. But when I look at the data that I pulled together for the U.S. government, the enforcement rate or percentage of domains in this segment where their DMARC is at quarantine or reject, it's only 47%. So what is that disconnect there? And the difference there is at the federal level, DMARC is well implemented, but all of these lower level different entities that are not U.S. government federal entities. Think of stuff you might not even think of as being part of the U.S. government, like the Georgia Lottery or the Illinois Lottery, right? The North Carolina Department of Transportation. All these different entities are technically government entities. So overall snapshot of government at different level here. Again, while DMARC is well implemented at the federal level, there's a ton of gaps here across all of the different state, municipal, whether it be courts, lottery, departments of transportation, state governments, very few of them actually have DMARC set up in a protected stance. And then again, this is where the numbers can be a little confusing. You look at 82% of the entities we queried here have a DMARC record, but a lot of those are not set up to protect against phishing and spoofing, which is crazy when you think, especially when you think about a lot of these are trust adjacent or financial adjacent entities. And something that just came up in the news last week, the state of Indiana had a contract with a specific email service platform and was using it to send specific notifications. I can't remember if it was Department of Transportation or somebody else, but they ended that contract last year sometime, and nobody deleted all the DNS records. Everybody left it in place. Apparently the ESP platform didn't delete the account, and somebody got into that account last week. Bad guy got in there and started sending those stupid, super annoying emails with the toll notices, the fake toll notices, right? That we've all been talking about, both coming through text and through email. The articles that I read about this specifically talked about email, but I think there might have been an SMS component to this too. They got into this dormant state of Indiana account for this omni-channel marketing platform and sent out a bunch of the phishing and spoofing phishing emails telling people, hey, you've got an overdue toll notice for your Texas toll tag, even though it was state of Indiana, but it's enough, get enough pennies from enough people, and that is a successful hack. And there's a couple things there. I'm going to put on my pretend sales hat for just a second. And if they were using Valimail and they were monitoring the tools that we provide them in our platform, you can do things like you can see what sender services are set up. When is the last time those sender services were used? How old are the authentication settings, the SPF records and DKIM keys for those? So you can look at that, and if you are a savvy enterprise, savvy organization, whether it be government, business, whatever, do that periodic review to see, oh, hey, we haven't used this marketing platform in more than 6 months. Let's deauthorize it. And so it's not authenticated if people break into it and send mail. If they had done that and used the tools that our platform offer for that, that would have been much less of a success for the bad guys, because they would have got in there, they would have sent the mail. Again, we can't protect this third-party platform. We can't stop somebody from hacking and login. They have some work that they really need to do better on that end. But at least we can make sure that the emails that the bad guys try to send are not going to be delivered successfully. So let's talk about online retail too. This is another one, like I talked about, where 95% of these different domains are protected. These are well-known, are not protected, have thought about DMARC. 95% of them have implemented a DMARC record. So it's great. And where this comes from, what drives that is they read the Yahoo and Google sender requirements, right? Retailers are very much more likely to be focused on the necessary requirements to send marketing mail to B2C consumer subscribers. And so they are very much paying attention to what needs to happen to get their mail delivered. Yahoo and Google first, now Microsoft, they said you've got to do DMARC. Great, they did DMARC. The gap there, though, is that only less than 2/3 of these actually implemented DMARC in a way that protects their emails against phishing and spoofing. So, I'm not, there's no name and shame here. Along the side here, you can see 10 random retailers that are represented in our data, but this is not a specific thing where I'm saying that these are ones that failed or anything like that. Just sort of highlighting here that across this segment, here's some of the examples of the people that we included in this segment, right? They're all people that sell online. They're all quite well-known brands in just about all cases. And it's great that they've heard of DMARC, but more than 1/3 of them are not protected against phishing and spoofing. Ugh, that's not good.
Yeah. Chris, I'm
Yeah.
curious to
Yeah.
get your take on this and what the hidden risk is for brands like these that are just treating DMARC like a checkbox rather than actual policy commitment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's really telling here that the kind of industry that's doing the best is the industry whose revenue is most closely tied to email, right? So, again, just follow follow the dollars, and you can kind of get a sense of where people's priorities are. But the inverse of that then means you are at risk if your customer contact is over email, and you are not maintaining trust in that chain. If you don't have that clear visibility to understand who is potentially reaching your customer as you, and ensuring that there's a high level of trust there, you're putting yourself at risk. Like if you think about it, that kind of checkbox approach, right? It lacks the understanding of the full intent and the full scope and really the full power of this. So, DMARC is an exceptionally powerful tool, and when you make that flip to reject, um, that back to that like 97%, that 97% of illegitimate traffic falls away. We had an actual example of this. At one of my companies, I flipped the switch to reject the day before Security Awareness Month because our security team was about to launch a big phishing attack, and I wanted to see how well Valimail would do on managing that phish attack. They sent 2.6 million phish emails within about a 30-minute window, and Valimail blocked every single one of them.
Did they get mad at you? Oh my God, hey, you
They
stopped our
were a
phishing
little
test.
upset. Yeah. It didn't do a lot for the security and IT relationship, but at the end of the day, I made sure that my users were not going to be affected by phish. Like, we got it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think if you think it all the way through, right, especially as technologists, instrumenting our environment, having observability, having monitoring is such an important thing. And when we move into this world where our contact with our customers is entirely digital, we need that same kind of visibility into those marketing relationships that we have into our infrastructure. So to be able to have that visibility and understand, where is all the sending happening? Who's receiving mail? What's my deliverability rate? And even just ensuring that you can kind of declaratively keep the crap out of your customer's inbox, and you can ensure that everything that shows up from your brand is something that is supposed to be there. That is a really good position to be in.
Yeah. Now let's and again, I'm not gonna read 12 different slides to you guys. I don't want to put you all to sleep. This is all in a report. We will send you a follow-up email with a link to everything in the report. But some other highlights here. I'm going to jump around specifically to financial services and compare that to what we just looked at with online retail, right? We talked about people that focus on money, right? Online retail, their marketing, they make money from marketing to consumers, and that includes email marketing, that includes online marketing so significantly. But when you look at a sort of an adjacent online focused industry, right? Financial services is very much has a strong online component. Like we said, so much of industry does, no matter where you live. It's all about what's happening online and the technology behind it. But financial services lags enforcement compared to online retail. And I sort of look at that and think, well, that's because the online retailers are so much the consumer marketing focused. And so they're perhaps a little more attuned to that. But it kind of highlights a gap here that people actually more directly handling monies for people and providing financial services for people really need to step up. And barely half of the entities we queried in this space, looked up in this, logged in this space, have DMARC set up to prevent phishing and spoofing, which is insane. Now, I've been writing about DMARC on my little blog for years now, right? I think the first time was 2012. It's been around for a while. Still got a ways to go for everybody to hear about it, but it has existed for a while there. I remember telling my wife when I worked for and with a different email sending platform that, hey, we were trying to get a specific bank to set up email authentication. Happened to be the bank that my wife banked at, and they just thought email authentication was crazy. It would never take off. They didn't want to do it. This is nuts. And I told her, either they do this or we go and close that account, because this is the future. We're not going to work with somebody who won't set up their email domains to protect them against phishing and spoofing. So we've come a long way since then. Like I said, that was a long time ago, but we've still got a long way to go here. 52% of financial service industries. Look at that. These are banks. These are insurance companies. Again, I'm not name and shame. This is not a case where the first one on the list is for sure somebody that's doing it wrong, but we just wanted to show that there are a lot of entities in this space that lag when it comes to DMARC enforcement.
Yeah, I think that kind of message out here also for folks is, if you want to leg up on your competition in your industry and you want to show that you are moving into a leading position, this is a relatively easy win.
Definitely, definitely. Boy, time is flying here. We're having fun here. I think maybe we should just pick one more and then wrap her up. Um, Warren, do you have
Yeah,
any particular
I
one you
was
want
gonna
me to focus
say,
on?
Al, if you could jump over to the higher ed one, I think is interesting because that had one of the largest gaps between implementation and enforcement. And what I think is so interesting about this is, as we talked about how every company and every organization is a tech company and org, higher ed is really interesting because not only are you working with all of the internal sending services and different apps that you might be operating a school with, including like, accounting apps and other payment things like that, but you're sending messages to thousands of students and thousands of alumni to those higher ed domains and email addresses. And many of those people have it set up to automatically forward on to their Gmail account or to their Yahoo account. And so this is where DMARC gets incredibly important for these orgs. If you're having a phishing email go out to your students, and then that gets sent on to Gmail, well, it very well could land all the way to that address that they are actually interacting with.
It's interesting too to compare, like higher ed is almost specifically edus, .edu domains. So it's almost exclusively four-year colleges. There's what's allowed in .edu is a little hand wavy and used to be more hand wavy in the past. There's a lot of entities grandfathered in, but if you compare it to sort of education adjacent entities, and that's where jump back here to education and training. It's a little bit better, right? It's 27% for the other and 38, almost 39% here for education and training. So the companies that provide services to higher ed, they're slightly better at getting that DMARC implemented in a way to protect them, but still a huge gap there. Nowhere near even half of the entities in this space doing things
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And honestly, I'd go back to revenue again, if you posit like, because this is your connection with customer. And that I think is the key takeaway with this is like, this is not a security technology. Yeah, it's a security technology, but this is about customer trust. This is ultimately a customer technology. This is a marketing capability. This is a sales capability disguised as a security system.
That's a good segue there. Hey, let's jump ahead here. And again, we'll have all of these data, all of these stats for you in email. It'll come after the fact. But where I wanted to segue was, like you say, it's all about revenue, right? If your security uh, posture isn't such that you are protecting everything against unwanted access, unwanted impersonation, you're putting revenue at risk. That's the scary thing, right? It's all about trust or losing that trust if you don't protect things.
Yeah. And kind of balancing out like, what is that cost per acquisition? And what's the value of trust? What does it cost you to regain trust versus go get a replacement customer? Right. So if you're trying to grow and you have to replace your customers, we see this all the time in subscription-based businesses where you focus on churn. You try to limit churn as much as possible because churn is the thing that starts to eat up your growth. So if you can maintain your current customer base, gives you a much easier time of adding on to it. You can't maintain your current customer base if they don't trust you.
So thank you for that, Chris. I think we are going to do our last little poll here. If you are still with us, if we haven't put you to sleep talking about DMARC, I know it can be a dry as toast topic sometimes, but it's so important. And that's why I like what I do here at Valimail. We're going to launch our last little poll here. If you're still with us, feel free to let us know how many domains does your organization have? Do you know I have just my personal little weird nerd me? I've got 135 domain names, and I didn't plan to. It just sort of happened. But you think about companies, right, where they might pick up and lock down typo variants. They might have old brand names, alternative brand names, different companies that they've acquired along the way. How big is your domain portfolio? It's usually a lot bigger than people realize. Chris, Uber probably owns more than 2 domains, I bet.
A lot. Yeah. I mean, I've worked for companies that would maintain thousands of domains. I've had a couple companies that had 3,000 plus domains.
And by the way, even if you don't use that domain actively for emailing yourself, doesn't mean that a bad guy couldn't, right?
Correct.
You still gotta lock
You're
that
still the
down.
owner. Yeah. You own it. You're responsible for it.
All right, so here's the results of that here. It looks like there's a lot of people that got 100+ domains here. So that's interesting to see, and good. I like seeing that, because I figured if 99% of people said 1 to 4, I would say you probably don't have full understanding of what your domain portfolio actually is. So it's good to see. So where do we go from here? I think, put my imaginary sales hat back on again, right? What can you do about this? And that is implement DMARC, please. Whether it be with us, of course I want it to be with us because I like money, but no matter how you do it, implement DMARC, set up DMARC. So you can monitor the different sending sources out there that are pretending to send mail from you. You're going to see the legitimate sources. You might see some of that shadow IT that we talked about, the entities that you didn't realize that are out there, but they're sending legitimate mail. And then you're also going to see the unauthorized stuff that you didn't realize of people in, whether it be people in, I see stuff in China, in Russia, in Korea. I see these weird sources for this unsolicited mail. And it's just for my little domains, right? It gets even weirder and bigger and more problematic when you get into the enterprise. So start by monitoring, and then after you have an understanding and you're in monitoring for a while, that's when you can start looking at moving to DMARC at enforcement, actually configuring domains so that you tell mailbox providers, tell the Yahoo and Googles of the world to reject mail if it says it's from me, but it fails authentication checks. That's how you stop phishing and spoofing dead. And then finally, take it to the next level there too, with a little bit of marketing spice on the top of the DMARC Protection Sunday, right? That's where a BIMI logo can come into play to help boost engagement and boost trust. It shows off that you're at enforcement with your domain, and it lets you show a logo in the inbox in a place where not everybody gets to show a logo today. So you can trailblaze there and use that. And our results, and working with our clients on it, we tend to see a nice little boost of engagement there, a little boost of interactivity when people implement a BIMI logo. Any closing thoughts, guys?
No, I mean, I think you nailed it. I love the BIMI logo personally. Like, I don't know, again, like I'm a revenue obsessed engineering executive. Any chance for a good impression, I like.
Yeah, and I think, the mailboxes that do honor the BIMI logo, they're going to be locking down the workarounds, right? So Gmail, now you can go and put in an avatar and like put in your logo and sort of work around it. But those things are going to be going away in the near future. And really the BIMI logo is declaring to your recipients that you've thought of them and that you've protected your domains with tools like DMARC.
Excellent. What do you think, guys? I think that's probably a good time to wrap it up here. Warren, what do you think?
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Really appreciate you both for joining us today, and for everybody that's attended and made it this far.
Great. Thanks very much. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
For having me.